podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie. Change your network. Change your background. I mean,
You know? What'd you say?
your background.
Should I go faster? You're like, change your background. Do it now. Quick.
You always have gold. You always say interesting things at the beginning. And then I thought, oh man, we're going to lose it if the background's bad.
We're being invaded by aliens. The background's on. Oh my God. And
Confuse him. Yeah. Our middle son comes home on Sundays and stays overnight, and we've been doing Sunday movie night. It does appear that every Sunday we have to watch a movie about zombies.
what'd you watch?
It was like hashtag still alive, I'm alive. It was a South Korean film that this is what I do. I just hold my hand up over in front of my face for a few of those scenes.
Do you
But
get
then I have to
more-
read the subtitles so that it's like,
And you read the subtitle, it says, lost my arm.
exactly. And that makes me think of our guest today, AJ Crabill.
No. Do you get more or less or the same freaked out, can't watch, have a hard time with reality gore, like a documentary or like real medical stuff, or zombie gore, horror
Oh.
movie gore?
That's interesting. When I watch The Pit, I sometimes have to put my hand up, like when they're deep in a body and it's
Yeah.
gory. Yeah. I actually feel like the last couple of weeks I've been doing all right with the zombie movies, better than I would have in the past. My wife and I took a walk yesterday, and she even remarked, she said, hey, you're doing pretty well with these zombie movies. I know a couple of years ago, I just would have been like, no, we're not watching that. Choose something else.
Yeah, I much more easily can handle the zombie gore. Does nothing to me. It doesn't bother me at all. But The Pit, I'm having Dee tell me, oh, they're about to do this. You better close your eyes. And watching it with a medical professional is so fun for me because she's just, what they're gonna do is they're gonna drill a small hole in the back of their skull.
And you hear it. Like, no.
Oh my God,
A doctor of education, not a medical doctor. Yeah.
no, not my thing. Not my
That's so
thing.
funny.
Yeah,
Well,
it
it's
is a little
interesting.
fun.
You say you bring up The Pit, and I will connect this instead of zombies. I will connect this to our guest today, AJ Crabill, because he talks about governance, and I think superintendents listening right now are going to be pretty interested in his background as a school board member and it's really just kind of talking about that governance structure between superintendents and school boards. And more than anything, the knowledge, the skills, the mindsets, like all of that kind of stuff that comes together to lead a school district. And you have mentioned in past weeks how similar hospitals are to schools. And just so you see, I was thinking about The Pit, man, it's like you just get to see like the upper administration that just kind of shows up and makes these declarations, and they're like knee deep in it in the emergency room being like, you don't get it. And how often, and then you've got the board of the hospital pressuring the administration, and they all don't get it in terms of what they're actually dealing with. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. So anyway,
I agree. I love that metaphor or a simile. I don't say simile, probably simile.
like her as
Yeah, it is such a reflection of the school structure, of the public school system. What I think though is the hierarchy of medical student to intern to resident to, all of those placements, which Dee now has explained to me 10,000 times. And I'm still like, wait, who's what? Where do they go? At what point are they at? Shows in public school, we're like, yep. Wait, do you have a heartbeat? Teacher,
get in there. Get in
Yeah.
there. Go get him, Tiger.
go get up. You're gonna be great.
That's-
oh, look, you can breathe.
How about the board that they have that sort of distinguishes what kind of care people need and to what level they're going to respond? And it does make me
Right.
think about schools. Oh, acute need. They're in there. They're doing it. It also makes me think sometimes about the patient who is sitting for a while, whose needs they're real. They're just not as extreme at that moment. And so to what level they are, they have to wait. And that's something school leaders hear all the time. What about the kid who needs help, but it's not a 5-alarm fire?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question.
Well, we can. Yeah, I know. I
That's
know.
a really-
Thanks. Yeah. Almost 5 seasons in. Finally got a good one. There
you
go.
did get a good one because that literally is the question that I don't know how many people can answer that.
No.
This is the challenge as a public ed, and maybe why we teach to the middle often. It's because I don't have the ability I'm either dealing with an alarm, or actually I'm only dealing with an alarm on either end of the spectrum. Alarm because they're super gifted and the parents are making a big stink about how they're not getting pushed, or vice versa. They need a ton of support and they are traumatized. They're bringing trauma to school, and I'm managing that. And anything in the middle is good luck.
Well,
On that
how about
positive
that,
note.
everybody? I know, exactly. So this is what I want to do. I do want to jump into our conversation with AJ Crabill, and really, and before we do that, obviously, I want to share who our sponsors each week, and they're so incredibly generous to think about our program and see the value in it. And so that's IXL. One of the things that AJ talks about, though, he argues that the primary role of the school board is to define the student outcomes and to prioritize what students should know and be able to do. And I think that some of our listeners are probably going to bristle at that because they'll wonder whether or not that is the school board's responsibility, or whether it's their responsibility as the experts in education to define those and to help meet the goals that have been set by a board. It's not their role to get really into it. And I think what you'll hear is that I don't think actually AJ wants them to be running the district. In fact, he's pretty explicit he doesn't. The focus, though, is on measurable results. And so that really mirrors IXL's value proposition, I think. And so their platform is research proven to improve student outcome. And I'm totally into that. So if you want to learn more, go to ixl.com/imperfect. You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm James Namansan. See you on the other side.
Today on an Imperfect Leader, my guest is AJ Crabill, former conservator at DeSoto ISD, a district that improved from F ratings in academics and finance and governance to B ratings under his leadership. And he is the governance director at the Council of Great City Schools. He's also been the former deputy commissioner of the Texas Education Agency, the TEA, and he's been a former board chair of the Kansas City Public Schools. And he's also the author, which is really what we want to talk about today. I mean, I do want to know about the Great City Schools, but we're going to talk about your book, which is Great on Their Behalf: Why School Boards Fail, How Yours Can Become Effective. It is, as I have read, because I really appreciate how you make some of it available to the public, it's a powerful call for stronger student-centered governance. AJ, welcome to an Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Excited for the conversation.
Me too. And what a pleasure to meet you. I'm thankful to Danny Bauer, the chief ruckus maker, as he likes to call himself, as we all know him. But he connected us, and I'm really glad that he did. I'd be surprised, though, if we hadn't passed each other in the halls of Tantera.
Right. Those are good times. Good times.
Oh, man.
I served, I think, 4 years on the board of the Missouri School Board Association. And spent a lot of time in the Lake of the Ozarks.
Fantastic. Well, and because MSBA is located in Columbia, again, I'm surprised we didn't cross paths. So I was the superintendent in Columbia, and it was a great, great experience. And I'm really happy, though, that the universe has conspired and has put us together today. Yeah. If it's okay, can I start with a question that I'm sure others have asked you? And I mean, you've served at every level: local board chair, state agency leader, national governance director. What drew you specifically to focus your career on how school boards govern?
Oh, no, this is a complete accident. I did not seek this out as a career opportunity.
A lot of people were like, it's always been part of my plan. I got right out of the gate. Actually,
when as a third grader, I had my heart set on sitting in 8-hour-long school board meetings.
Well, I mean, if you really are thoughtful about it, it's like we do prepare kids for those things by making them sit for 7 hours. Maybe you were.
Part.
Yeah.
So that part.
Yeah.
And no, I actually kind of stumbled into school board service, honestly, the way I think a lot of school board members do, in that I was just a parent leader. I was head of the parent association at my kid's school at the time. And, you show up at too many of those and eventually you get deployed to a board meeting to saber rattle on behalf of the school, and you show up at one too many board meetings, and next thing you're on the school board. And so it definitely was not a intended path, and something that I deeply and profoundly hated with all of my being for a short while. In fact, I came very close to resigning from the school board in my first couple of years of service, just because of how horrible of an experience it was. I think partially because I had no idea what I was doing. I think a lot of us pretend, vote for me. I know how to make a difference on school. I think realistically, most people are like me. We have no idea what we're doing when we get on school board. We think we do, and we have intentions. Our heart is for children. We want to see greatness for our children. All of that is authentic. All of that is real. 100,000 some odd school board members across the country, and what you can rely on is these are some of the best people in your communities. However, loving children and being competent in governance are not automatic phenomenon. And so I just really just was angered and frustrated and was ready to give up. And some of the people who are on my campaign team, I went to them and said, hey, this isn't what I ran to do. I just want to give you all the respect so my campaign leaders know that I plan to resign from the board. And they told me in no uncertain terms that we didn't knock on all these doors that you could punk out. Like, you had to come up with a different solution. So at that point, I was like, okay.
Talk straight talk. That's some straight talk.
Officially off the table. Yeah. They have never, ever given any consideration to my feelings whatsoever as part of that.
Well, I call that friendship. That's
Yes,
real friendship.
These are people I adore to this day, and they still treat me horribly to this day.
That sounds like family now.
But they sent me back and said, you have to come up with a different plan because resigning is out of the picture. And so I started doing my homework and figure out what does really effective school board governance look like, and kind of where are we missing the mark? Because even though I felt in my spirit that what we were doing wasn't serving children, I didn't have the words or the knowledge or the insights to really describe why. And so I became a student of governance, mostly out of desperation more than anything else. And through that, inspired some of my colleagues to join me in this search. And we really interrogated what would it look like for us as a board to actually be intensely focused on improving student outcomes. And they wound up asking me to be board chair after the next election. We really kind of wound down everything we were doing and said, what we're doing right now does not serve children. There's no benefit to this. And so it'd be better off for us to really basically stop pretending to govern, spend some time figuring out what effective governance would look like, reboot our entire governance operating system, so to speak, and then start again. And so we did. We took several months, really interrogated it, did a lot of research, spoke with a lot of experts across the country. And then about 3-4 months later, we had a new way of governing that was essentially the kind of nascent version of the things that I now describe in the book about the practices that highly effective boards that are intensely focused on improving student outcomes, that they really practice. And from there, other people saw it like, man, your board was a nightmare, complete dumpster fire. But now you all are actually doing great things, and people got curious. So like,
I'm curious. So yeah, can you talk about one piece of advice that you might give those who have had a similar experience? Because I had both. I had an amazing board that worked really diligently to work towards those governance awards, and the award is whatever. It's fine. It's nice recognition.
Yeah.
What for me I saw was an intentionality about wanting to get better and learning how to communicate and recognize roles and responsibilities and those types of things. And then I was a member of boards where everybody was an expert because they went to school or because they had a PhD. And yeah. And when it was proposed that maybe we should do some governance work, it was like, there was sort of, we don't need that. And I didn't always have the words for how to explain why we desperately needed it for our relationship between superintendent and board, and for their internal relationship, particularly when things got difficult. So I'm kind of curious, what is some advice that as you interrogated this work and really dismantled or sort of untangled where you were, what conclusions did you come to?
It's funny you asked that. I literally was just on the phone with board chair and vice chair team right before I hung up to connect with you today. And one of the things they were talking about was that they have a bunch of board members who kind of want to go off and all do their own things individually. And each of them want to access resources of the districts to support their particular thing and whatnot. And as I was sharing with the board chair and vice chair, was like, state law doesn't actually afford any individual board member any authority whatsoever.
Right.
No,
Collectively, you have authority.
Collectively,
individually,
yes.
You're just
none whatsoever. No individual board member. By state law, it's pretty clear in most states that no individual board member has the power to encumber resources of the district unless there is some place where it's specified in law, usually around access to public information, or unless the board just says otherwise.
Right. Oh my God. You just made me think about a super I talked to who said that they had a board member who was wanting to look at people's personnel files on HR and how the superintendent was just looking for advice on how to say to them, as a board, you can vote to in executive session, in a closed session, you can vote to look at somebody's, but you have to be really clear about why. But individually, you can't just start going into HR and going through their files to look at people's stuff.
Yeah, so certainly no board member has the authority to show up at the district office and just start walking into offices and opening up filing cabinets. That much is pretty much clear. But what I think what this particular board chair and vice chair is struggling with is, okay, what do we do in those circumstances? And I think part of what people have to realize is that, because you're asking like some pro tips here, part of the thing you'll have to realize is that the board, only when it's acting collectively does it have the authority, but that's not an accident. Like that's an intention. Because essentially it's our law's way of saying that we want the entire community to have a say in what happens in the school system. And our way of having the entire community have a say is that a majority of the board, not an individual board member for one part of the community, but a majority of the board actually have to come together and agree on things in order to move forward. One of the challenges that we run into is that, honestly, most boards haven't identified what the priorities are. And in the absence of the board collectively saying, here are what the priorities are, what you have is a bunch of individual board members, people like myself, do-gooders extraordinaire, who are just trying to figure out what is the difference I individually can make. And that is a failure of the board to have collectively governed.
Yeah.
When the board says, here are the priorities, and as a board, we're going to discipline ourselves and govern in a way where we're going to be focused on these priorities, because this is what we collectively as the community's representatives say are the main thing. When a board behaves that way, it's a lot more easy for the board to come together in cohesion. When a board doesn't collectively take action to say, here's what the priorities are, you open up the door for each board member to try to define that for themselves.
Yes.
And so that's really one of our first pieces of advice for boards is the board. And this is tweaks some people the wrong way, not the superintendent. The board needs to say, here's what the priorities are collectively, that we are then going to turn around and hold the superintendent accountable for going out and implementing.
Absolutely. Because think about it this way, at least from a superintendent's perspective, superintendents don't last very long, as we've indicated. And so it has to be right. So their legacy, it ought to be the board's legacy of what they have sort of cast as a vision. Should they rely on the superintendent to provide some feedback as an educational expert who's in classrooms and talking to teachers and meeting with community members and sort of saying, this is what I perceive to be of value here in the community? But in the end, it's a community that needs to drive where it wants to go. A board, and if the superintendent feels as if it's going in the wrong direction, they can say that, or also leave because
it's not hard to find a job as a superintendent.
That's true. It's like a baseball manager. Once you've been one, you can be one again. So it's sometimes hard to get the job initially. For some, but I'm curious because two things came to mind. One, when they don't have a shared image about what they want to do, they individually, as I understand you saying, they will take it upon themselves to begin maybe doing some of that work themselves, or ask the superintendent to be their partner in that work, for which they don't recognize that a 7-member board or a 5-member board, they're asking, they may say, I only have 2 things I want to work on. I only have 2 things I want to work on. But you're like, yeah, but that's 10 or 14 things, depending on the size of your board. And so, right. And so then how will I be evaluated exactly? The other thing I wanted to ask, because I was reading an article that you wrote for SA. So, and it was the case against board adoption of strategic plans. And I want to reconcile with something you just said in terms of how they ought to make sure they have a shared image about what they want to create together. And yet you're saying that's very different from a board-driven strategic plan, that it can actually weaken the superintendent's accountability. So do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the distinction here is between adult inputs and student outcomes. So the adult inputs are what are the things the adults are doing at the beginning of the cycle to try to get results in the school system. The student outcomes are what are the things students know and are able to do at the end of the cycle as a result of all the things that the adults have done. What I'm suggesting is the board needs to define the student outcomes. What is it we want students to know and be able to do that are the top priority focus for the school system? And then they delegate to the superintendent, what are the adult inputs that need to happen to get us to that? And the strategic plan is more manifestation of, okay, that is the priority that we have to accomplish. Now, the strategic plan is what are all of the things we're going to put in place to get us there? That's why the strategic plan needs to belong to the superintendent, because they're the ones selecting all the adult inputs, because they have that expertise. And this is the thing that people miss is the board has very powerful expertise that no one, including the superintendent, has. The board's expertise is representing the vision and values of the community. That is the expertise of the board. No one else has this because literally no one else was selected by the community to be the community's representatives of their vision and values. And so the board's expertise is unique and powerful. And so it should be deployed wherever community vision and value, where expertise around community vision and value is necessary. It's definitely necessary in saying, what are the priorities of the school system? Right. The superintendent, however, is not the community's representative. The superintendent doesn't have expertise in representing the vision values of the community. The superintendent does, however, have expertise in implementing the vision and values of the community as conferred to them by the board. And so the superintendent has to take the vision and values that are provided to him by the board and say, okay, I will now come up with a plan for how we will implement that. We refer to that plan as the strategic plan. That's why the superintendent needs to own it. Because if they start to deploy one of their strategies, one of these adult inputs, what are the things that we're trying to do to accomplish it, and it doesn't work, we don't want the superintendent to go to the board and say, hey, should I pick something else? We want the superintendent to do their job and figure out,
right.
What do I need to do differently that's actually going to work?
Let me pose this to you just from a superintendent's lens, because I was superintendent after Michael Brown was murdered, right? And so as a community, the community actually said, we have an obligation to focus on the achievement of Black children. And this was the first time that they'd actually, like as a board, didn't just say, well, that's important, but really want to make sure that our football team wins, whatever.
Yeah.
It was like, and that's not fair to that community, but it really was sort of like a rallying cry. Then we get through the pandemic, and we come out of the pandemic, and in a state that may have decided that it was not going to prioritize historically oppressed population of people and community and children in particular, there was sort of a shift toward maybe changing that focus. And I was proud to be part of a team that said, actually, the goals that were set by the previous board are the noble and right goals to be doing, and we ought to keep doing them. And yet, I'm not, like, I hope I'm not being antagonistic in our conversation, but I'm curious, like, at some point, sometimes the board's makeup shifts and they choose fine goals, but they're not the right goals based on where, like, we finally were at a moment where it was a tipping point to make the right goals in a community that was resource rich, where in this perspective, Kansas City and St. Louis, African-American kids were doing better in those under-resourced communities than they were in this well-resourced community. So it really spoke to, we have some work to do. And so I guess this is a long rambling question, so I appreciate you sticking with me, but it's like, how do you reconcile when the board shifts their belief of what is important, and yet, like, the strategic plan ought not to change?
So I would say that the strategic focus of the board should be much more fixed. We encourage boards to adopt 5-year goals, for example. So I'd say the strategic vision of the board needs to remain relatively fixed. The strategies for accomplishing it that the superintendent brings should be more the variables. They need to shift to match whatever the reality is.
Gotcha. So the board, it is a higher level goal of, look, all kids need to be reading our grade level of 3rd grade, particularly those who have, or not even particularly, just we want all kids reading on grade level by 3rd grade. And then the superintendent is saying, look, I appreciate this higher level goal. Let me tell you where we are in terms of, by disaggregating our data, the issue is not white and Asian kids in our community. The issue is our second language learners, our African-American kids, our kids on free and reduced lunch. And so that's really where our resources, we're resource rich, but we're going to be really intentional about putting resources into this area because that's our goal.
So either of those could be true. The board could have a goal about all 3rd grade literacy and say, we need to improve this. You as a superintendent could analyze the data and say, the only way we actually create the quantity of improvement you all want to see is we've got to lift up from the bottom. And that could be your professional judgment that you're bringing. And so then your strategic plan, your strategies reflect that. Ultimately, the board could say, our goal is that we want to see all of our students who are more than one, all of our 3rd graders who are more than 1 grade level behind in literacy, we want to see them improve dramatically. And you look at that and say, the majority of our kids who are a grade level behind all look like AJ. And so our strategy is going to try to lift up the little AJs of the school system. And so then your strategic plan has that. And so the board could go either way. They could have a broad vision. They could have a narrow vision. But whatever they adopt, then they pass the baton to the superintendent and say, you got to come up with a plan for this. And then you, the superintendent, have to analyze that. Now, to your previous question, kind of what about kind of constantly changing things? Well, this is where our coaching says, yeah, we definitely trust the board. We definitely trust the wisdom of the board, even if they're doing things that we disagree with. We just want to know that they're actually doing their work of representing the vision and values of the community effectively. And what that partially means is we're setting 5-year goals. So we're not just changing goals every 30 minutes. But what it also means is we're representing the vision and values of the entire community, not just the wants and whims of a few influential community members. Now, I happen to have some very influential community members who worked hard to get me elected. But the moment I'm elected, my job is not to cater to those few individuals. My job is to try to figure out what is the collective vision of the entire community and how are we being responsive to that? And so what I've generally found is when boards authentically go out and do the listening, because it usually requires a full-throated listening.
Right. Listening without promising. Listening. Right. I'm going to do something about this.
No, they're not promising anything. They're not prompting. They're not saying, hey, what do you think should be the goals? They're saying, we need to capture the vision of the community because we're going to set 5-year goals. Tell us what we should be considering as we adopt that. And then so they have this big body of feedback from the community writ large, often doing dozens of community listenings all around the community, and then using that to say, this is what the priorities are. And we're going to stand on these priorities for the next 5 years. And then the next board in 5 years, they're going to have, when it's time to change the goals, they don't get to just pick the goals that Twitter likes or what Facebook said this week. Like they actually have to go out and do the listening all over again and harvest that insight from the community and then adopt that as the next set of 5-year goals and then challenge the superintendent. All right, you got 5 years on the clock, put in work.
Love it. Our guest today is AJ Crabill, former conservator at DeSoto ISD, governance director of the Council of Great City Schools, his current role, and a former leader at both the Texas Education Agency, Kansas City Public Schools. But we're talking today about a number of things and specifically about his book, Great on Their Behalf, Why School Boards Fail and How Yours Can Become Effective. In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension, it's called nested patterns, and nested patterns really speaks to how people in an organization want to be together, like sort of their behaviors. Yeah. And inside that dimension, there's a term, growth mindset. Also in there is harvesting the collective wisdom. So when you use the word harvest, I went, oh yeah, man, like we're so aligned. But this willingness to maybe dispute like the indisputable or refute the irrefutable. And in your book, Great on Their Behalf, you specifically draw your readers' attention to mindset. And in fact, you identify knowledge, skills, and mindset as these 3 levers of effective governance. And I think you said that mindset is the foundation, but I'm wondering, can you sort of unpack these terms for us? How do they differ? Yeah. And then why is mindset the foundation?
Well, so knowledge is just what you know. Skill is what you are able to do with what you know. And mindset is your view of the world, how you make meaning of the things that are unfolding in the world around you. And so this is crucial because while knowledge is definitely a driver of adult behavior change, it is, we find, to be the least impactful of the 3. Knowledge is absolutely a necessary driver of adult behavior change. If it produces change of this size, skill is an even stronger driver of adult behavior change. With knowledge, if I don't know anything about the English language, then I'm probably not going to be a great English teacher. So give me some knowledge about English and I can change my behaviors in a way that's going to help me teach English more powerfully. But skill is even more powerful driver. If I know English, but I don't have any idea how to teach English, give me some pedagogy, give me some instructional strategies, give me some training in how to deploy the science of reading. And now all of a sudden with those skills, the instruction I can deploy is even more powerful than the instruction I could have deployed with just the knowledge about the topic. And so skill is a powerful driver of adult behavior change. But we still say that of the 3, mindset is by far the most powerful. And that's because even if I have all knowledge and I have all skill about teaching English, if my view of the world, if my way of making meaning of what's happening around me is, you know what, little AJ just don't want to learn. If that's my view, like little Peter don't actually care about his education. Right. All the knowledge and skill in the world is not going to improve my instruction of little Peter. All the knowledge and skill in the world will be, and in fact, when I take all of that massive accumulation of knowledge and skills and I put it out there and little AJ doesn't get it on the first try, I'm just going to turn around and like, I told you, you just don't want to learn. That is a mindset phenomenon, not a knowledge and skill phenomenon. But take that exact same teacher, they have this transformative experience and they walk away and say, you know what? my view of the world, my way of making meaning of the world is that little AJ, little Peter, they want this knowledge, but there's just a gap between where they're at and where they want to be. My job is to be the bridge over that gap. It's
Right.
a mindset shift. It's
Right.
just a
They
way
can't
of
learn it
viewing the
yet,
world.
or they haven't learned it yet.
They haven't
right?
gotten there yet. They want it, and it's my job to help them get there. Inside of that mindset shift, now whatever knowledge and skills I possess is powerfully available. Because then when I deploy that lesson, the little AJ doesn't get it, but he wants it. I just got to be the bridge. And so then now I'm going to go reevaluate my instructional strategies, and I'm going to reteach. And when he doesn't get it the next time, I'm going to reteach again. And when he doesn't get it the next time, I'm going to reteach again. But I will persist. My behavior is more powerful because I am unyielding in my effort. This is what makes mindset the most powerful of the three levers, is that it unlocks all of the potency that is hidden and locked away in our knowledge and skills.
So I think of I'm sure you're familiar with the iceberg model when you think about systems thinking, like everything above the water is sort of the actions that you see, but what you don't see are right beneath the water. So right beneath the water are the patterns of behavior or the structures of the system, acknowledging that like the behaviors that you see are a function of how the system has been structured. Yeah. And then below that are the beliefs, values, and principles that sort of underhinge all of it. And I imagine when you describe the different governing structures or cultures, like that those influence absolutely, and which is why it's a sort of a clarion call about why they need to actually engage in board development, because they have to unpack how people see the world to better understand how they're going to set appropriate and meaningful goals for their schools.
Well, and part of the challenge is, I think boards face nationwide is the same challenge I think a lot of the teachers face, is that much of the professional development that is offered to board members and much of the professional development I see offered to teachers has nothing to do with mindset. It's almost exclusively knowledge and skills. And so essentially in that moment, the assumption we're making is that if we just knowledge and skills our teachers to death, that's going to improve instruction. Or if we just knowledge and skills our board members to death, that's what's going to improve governance. And that just doesn't match my experience. My experience is that often the most powerful transition comes from the board members having an awakening of seeing the world in a different way, of seeing their leadership
and understanding their own like self-reflection about how they were socialized, right?
Absolutely.
And being sort of, that was some of the, I would say, some of the most powerful work we did when we had this really high functioning board that was willing to engage around how they were socialized and a better idea about why they sort of saw the world the way that they see it. Yeah, that is such important work. And it's interesting is because what we don't anticipate sometimes is the pushback on why that's important, because they don't like what it's revealing in terms of some of the things
it's
sort of believe, right? They're like, oh, yeah.
You're probably not going to offend people by presenting them with knowledge and skills. You should adopt a goal. Those goals should be smart. You're probably not going to offend a lot of people.
That's great.
But ask people to reevaluate how they've been showing up, reevaluate who I've been being as a manifestation of the things that I've been socializing into. What is my view of the world that has served as a limitation of holding back my experience of power as a leader? That gets a little bit more dicey. And so I think as organizations supporting teachers and an organization supporting board members, it is much more comfortable just to pretend that if we offer enough knowledge and skills training, that will be sufficient. But I don't believe it's sufficient. I think it's comfortable for those of us who support school boards to limit the conversation to that, but I don't think it's the transformation that our children deserve.
What should if a new member realizes that they're part of a dysfunctional governance culture, what's the first move that they should make?
So try to get one friend. So the moment
that actually is good advice.
The moment I wake up to the fact that my choices, my adult behaviors have in fact been instrumental in holding our children back. The moment I have that awakening, so I'm the new member and I wake up to this moment of, oh, wait a minute, it's actually my choices, my adult behaviors that are making it harder for our children to be successful, that I'm not being the board member that my students need me to be. The moment I have that awakening, okay, so now the next step is I got to find one more friend. Don't go to the full board and be like, hey, look, folks, all of you are destroying children. Don't do that. That's right. That's not going to work out.
Aren't you lucky I'm here?
Exactly. Like it's gonna sound self-righteous real quick, but instead sit down with one board member and share that revelation. Don't talk about that board member. Talk about the revelation I've had. Hey, I had XYZ experience. I went to Peter's workshop. I went to AJ's workshop, and I really had this awakening that I've been trapped inside of this mindset that has me focused on the needs of adults and their preferences and what makes them comfortable, but isn't actually having me focused on what are the needs of students and how do we create a system that works for them. And here's what I'm seeing in my own choices and my own behaviors. I have that conversation, share with them. And I find that is generally going to be far more inspirational that when I am sharing about my revelations, about my failures as a leader, that is far more, a more powerful invitation to that one colleague. We're sitting over coffee in our own private location, not at a board meeting.
I was about to say, and remember, don't do it with more than two, no more than two, right? Because
that is a more powerful invitation to my colleague to be like, well, now that you mentioned it, I can see some areas in my own life where maybe I too haven't been the board member that I intended to be, and I want to be, I have a desire to be, like I want to make this difference for students, but I'm getting a sense of, there's some places where I could improve as well. And so the moment that I have that experience of transformation, like the next invitation is how can I find some of my colleagues and start with one, say, and how do I share with them? Because what I often see board members do is they will have this awakening, but then inside of that awakening, they'll immediately go and start telling everybody else how horrible other people, well, you need to do this and you need to do this. And that self-righteousness just isn't transformative.
Yeah.
But sharing, here's my awakening. And I just want to share that with somebody. I want to get it off my chest and share what I'm going to try to, I find that to be a more powerful invitation to others to begin their own reflective journey.
When you are advising board members, to what extent do you remind them, particularly for a 7-member board, hey, we don't need to have a 7-0 vote to do the right thing for kids? Like a whip up the vote for 4. I mean, it would be great, but if I've had this awakening and I've brought this to 1, and there's a ripple effect where they say, look, actually, you're speaking exactly what we've been trying to achieve or whatever, and now it's a 4-3 vote to do the right thing for kids. That's okay. Like, I think sometimes board members feel like we have to have a 6-1 or a 7-0, or otherwise it reflects that there's like dysfunction or breaking in the board. It's like, actually, it displays that this was a hard decision and it's okay that you whipped up the vote for 4.
Yeah, I think this is a challenge. I get asked this question often.
Oh man, I thought it was unique.
Should we be pursuing a 7-0 vote? And I tell people, as I've scoured the research literature on this, there's definitely literature that says that boards that function in a professional and collaborative manner get more results than boards that don't. But I've yet to come across in the literature that definitively show that boards that vote unanimously get better results for students than boards that don't. If I had evidence to suggest that's true, then I would be telling boards, well,
right,
votes need to be unanimous. But the evidence just doesn't exist for that. And so
my response often was, hey, look, speaking of 7-0 is, a 7-0 vote does not represent necessarily a rubber stamp. It represents that we've communicated well, we've answered questions, we've taken the time, and that at this point, like the board feels comfortable voting. Like I wouldn't bring something that was going to be controversial that I'm wringing my hands wondering if it's going to go 4-3. Like that's not a good look for the district. So I would say, I was just curious from the other perspective, if you've entered a dysfunctional board as a board member and you're going, all right, I love your advice in terms of find that one person on the board who is receptive and is willing and then interested in learning about like how we can do better and how over time that ripple effect might increase it to a majority 4. And that's okay. You don't have to keep going and waiting till you get all 7 because you may not get there.
Well, the challenge is I don't think it's appropriate for adults to wait for adult comfort before pursuing justice for children.
It's good. Yeah.
And so I do appreciate, can we move forward with all the board members? Can we, at minimum, have we made sure that all the board members have had an opportunity to be heard and have their voice considered? Because they are part of the community's voice. And so I don't want to have any of them suppressed or not heard. But at the end of the day, the board sometimes just needs to vote and take action and proceed. I think from the management side of it, I always, for example, my role as conservator in DeSoto, being kind of on the quasi-management side of the house, I was definitely always checking in with my board members to say, hey, do we all have an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish here and why this is the direction that's being recommended? And so we often would have a fair number of 7-0 votes, as you said, as a manifestation of just being deliberate about trying to bring people along for the journey and making sure that we factored in the considerations of the different board members. But there were some times when I said, this is what justice for children looks like. And we are doing this, period. And if that's a 6-1, if that's a 5-2, if that's a 4-3, so be it. Sometimes you just have to move. But for the lower stakes stuff, my inclination.
Oh, that's a good
down.
distinction. Lower stake stuff. You want 7-0 because it shouldn't be controversial. But if it's like start times, that's a big vote.
Gotta do,
or attendance
do.
areas, that's a big vote in terms of, yeah, that's good. Okay, we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an Imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR. So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
So AJ, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every guest who comes on our podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate with you?
I really appreciate that. The call to humility is something I appreciate, and the nudge that I feel like you offer your guest is just a moment to recognize that there are the things that are in my heart of what I want to be true, and then there are my actions that are not always a perfect manifestation. If
I love
we were
that.
to put it,
Yeah.
we were to put it in a biblical sense, we'd say the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so I don't always perfectly live out the aspirations of my heart. And I can think of so many examples of that where here is where my intentions were, but my impact fell short of that. And so just acknowledging that all of us in our various leadership roles are on a journey and to try to make more perfect the impacts that we have for the students that we serve, I think reserves space for our humanity, for us to honor the effort that we're doing in, but also have a clear-eyed view that sometimes the effort didn't manifest in the results. And we have to be willing to confront that it's not actually useful to wave the victory flag because we intended to serve children. It's actually more useful to acknowledge, oh, this is what we intended to get done for children. And I didn't actually get us there. What am I going to do differently? Whereas if
I got us this far, and now we have work, and we still have work to do because we're at the end of year 5, but we've got to renew and get to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as people come to it from the contrary worldview, I am the perfect leader. I think what happens is in that moment, I have this really vested interest in trying to warp reality to make myself look good and to warp the data that I present to try to show a narrative. I think when superintendents can get beyond that and say, look, I'm not here from perfection. I will be transparent about what we do that works, but also be transparent about what we do that doesn't work, because both of those are in service to actually improving our impact on children. And so I appreciate, like I said, the humility that comes from the idea of, yeah, I'm an imperfect leader and I'm constantly in pursuit of that improvement on behalf of the students I serve.
Our guest today was AJ Crabill, the former conservator at DeSoto ISD and the governance director at the Council of Great City Schools. He's also the author of Great on Their Behalf, Why School Boards Fail and How Yours Can Become Effective. And I think the last thing I would say is I'm really grateful for your time, particularly because you've helped me, and I know the thousands of superintendents who listen to this each month, the active role that the active role and their responsibility the board should have in terms of creating where the district, what its goals might be, but it's the active role and responsibility of the superintendent to make those things happen. And sometimes we conflate the two, or sometimes we confuse, and we rely on the superintendent to not only make things happen, but also tell the community what they should be doing. And I really appreciate that. And then sort of this idea of that actually gets us closer to marrying both our aspiration of our heart and our actions. So truly, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
No, a joy. And anytime you want to nerd out on school board stuff, always happy to join you.
Oh, I might contact me. This is super fun. Okay, we're back.
All right. Before we went into the interview, you said that the school board should determine student outcomes or define student outcomes. And could you say a little bit more about how that works as it relates to the superintendent?
I'm so glad you bring that back up, because as we're going into the conversation, I'm like, you know what? I think some superintendents will probably bristle about this or something like that. And that's because I sometimes think that it's really the superintendent's role to define them. But what he says, and I'm sure if he's listening, yeah, say it. What he says is there's actually a distinction, that the board represents the community. So the community's vision, the community's values, they own the what. And the superintendent has to use their professional expertise to manage like all those inputs and then implement. So the how. And so like the superintendent may not totally define what they hope to see for students, but they certainly own the actual plan to make it happen. And I think there is an appropriate distinction there. Sometimes superintendents think they're supposed to do both, and that puts them at odds with their board, who they have a role to play. They were elected as a publicly elected board to make good things happen for kids, and superintendents come and go. Boards and communities are there perpetually.
I mean, the one thing will you clarify for me, though, in listening to that, when you say they define, and he said defining desired student outcomes, what does that sound like when a board member says that? What does a community say that would make you go, okay, that's the outcome?
Yeah. So here's the thing I would say. It's the superintendent's role to convene community listening sessions, to convene the community together to talk about what do we want to create for kids.
Yeah.
And the board, in sometimes the absence of a robust community gathering, in terms of people got busy lives, they got things to do. They were elected to represent parts of the business community, parts of the different interest groups that exist in the community. And so they can at least express, for instance, we're a rural community, and one of our biggest worries is that we are not providing opportunities for kids beyond high school where they can come back and live and work and thrive here. And so we want to make sure that we're a school district that is creating opportunities, that is partnering with local businesses, that is cultivating a curiosity that students who are super bright and might create a business of their own while they're still in high, that we can create the conditions for our community to thrive. And we are assigning that as a goal. Now, superintendent and team, go figure out how to do that and then report, that kind of thing. I think that's what I'm speaking to.
What I like about that is the need for a school board member to understand what the community that they represent is, what they're interested in terms of outcomes for kids. That is a really fun conversation to have as a community member.
Totally, right? Because I think sometimes people run for board because I really like kids and I want to contribute whatever skills I might have. And I'm like, yeah, you should. And you should be more active. You should be really
Yeah.
mindful of what is happening in our community and what our community needs, because you might be hiring a new superintendent in just a few years. You may be fighting really hard to retain this superintendent that you've got right now, who's got ideas on how to make the things you value possible.
Can I make one more connection that just
I
occurred
love
to
it.
me as I hear you talking? I've run APC Leadership Collaborative now. This is our 13th year. And I don't know whether I'll ever go back into a system different from running an organization myself. And there's a ton of flaws with how I run the organization or the work that we do. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it struggles, all that stuff. But one key learning I've had is that when I was employed, particularly as a teacher, as an educator in the public system, I don't think I took enough personal agency. I don't think I said, oh, you know what? I have a role to play in how this system works. Rather, I waited for the system to do things for me. To the point of like, they're just going to pay me. They'll just deposit money in a retirement account for me. There's a union that I just sign up for and they'll just advocate for me. Like all of that, to the point where like, oh, the bells will tell me when to pee. I will go pee when this bell rings. And this is similar. I think sometimes people run for the board without realizing that actually you have agency in the community. You have agency to shape the public educational system for the benefit of the
Yes.
community in which you live.
Yes. I often said it's the public schools. I work
That's
here.
right.
It's
That's
the
right.
public schools. Sometimes people would throw that back in my face to be like, this is what we want. And I'm like, that's not possible.
That's even better. This is what you want. And you're like, yeah,
I hear you.
yeah, water slides would be great. Oh, that's so funny. But that just occurred to me. I'm like, oh, I think that happens. I think school board members, people who run for school board aren't always thinking about what impact they could have
Yes.
collectively.
This is what I wanted to say, though. Exactly that word, because it's about collective authority. So you join
Right,
a
you
school
said that.
board, right? And it isn't about an individual board member and their ability to make change or actions, because they can't. As an individual, they have no power.
Right.
As a board, as a collective, they have such authority. And
In fact, he said dysfunction emerges when individuals act independently instead of collectively. And I mean, in districts all over the nation that have gotten to work in, that I've got to be in, that is oh yeah, we have a 5 board member, or there are 5 people on the board. 4 of us we're not all politically aligned, but we're aligned in terms of kids. Then there's a sort of one person that's kind of wacky. The wacky person is bringing their own individual things. They aren't necessarily tied to anything. And you're like, what the heck?
I know. It's actually kind of interesting, because sometimes when you have 2 outliers, then it's like or your board votes 5-2. There's 2 outliers. Okay, that's fine. Sometimes that one, they're so out of control, and nobody knows how to shut down the one. Yeah,
That's so true. And often the one being really vocal, often charismatic, like really interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Wait, did you just say that you want to make sure that all the streets in the school are one way toward the school? How would people leave?
I mean, we have to be welcoming. We want people to come to us. Okay. So I'm curious, though, like what resonated for you?
He talked a lot about mindset over skills, over knowledge and skills. I think the quote that he said was, even if I have all the knowledge and skill, if my view of the world is little AJ just doesn't want to learn, all the knowledge and skill in the world is not going to improve my instruction. I mean, I assume you probably heard that and thought, oh, Jamie's going to talk about that.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how that literally was my why for getting into education in the first place. I wanted to be the Mexican teacher I never had. That's why I chose it. I didn't think about, I wanted to be the best literacy teacher I ever had. I didn't think of anything of the content. I really thought about my own identity and the way in which I could shift how people think about and how kids experience school who were like me.
Yep.
Didn't experience school that way.
Yep.
And I will say, though, I do agree that boards who go through that process of coming to some collective mindset learnings, ahas, new discoveries about who they are and what they seem to be valuing, different from what necessarily the community needs or who the kids are, is really important. And I did that work, just mindset work, for so many years. And what I have found is I have had so many people say, wow, I have never really realized that. I have never thought about that. I am moved. I am extremely tears moved. And then the next day, they're still not teaching kids to read. And I'm like, okay.
What do we say? If you know better, do better. Now I know better. There's a contract here. There's a promise. The do better part. Begin now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that has been my work. And so I don't know if I'm pushing back on him. I'm only saying that the balance, if you go knowledge first without the mindset work, then the knowledge is sticking to a mindset that may not be actually related to serving every kid. If you have an open mindset to serving every kid, that's why we're here. That's public. Okay. Now, how do we do that?
Yeah, well, essentially, just like we've talked about it in the past, and I'll say again, is this iceberg model. And so at the very base of it is our beliefs, our principles, and our values. And so if you're shifting a mindset and you've been successful with that, you still have to think about the structure of the system and what are the things you're going to do to shift and change the system so that patterns of behavior begin to shift so that it's observable. And so maybe it is a celebration that they have realized this aha and the tears that you described, the fundamental desire for change. And then AJ talked about in terms of a board being a collective. Same thing, individually, you may not know how to change that. So collectively, what are the conditions we're going to shift or change so that you can be successful with this new way of thinking? So, you could, I was just trying to think through like prerequisites for certain classes. And so you'll revert back to a former mindset if you if you don't see anything changing in terms of who's taking advanced classes, then it shifts you back to, that was good work, but it sounds like that was an isolated case. And actually what's true is that here are the kids who can take these classes, the others can't. So I must revert back to my mindset about them.
Exactly. He does say that one other thing that he says about shifting the mindset and how you shift the mindset aligns directly with how I approach shifting mindsets. And that is telling people they're doing it wrong over and over doesn't shift mindsets.
No, fossilizes.
Yeah, it does. And you've got to be open to, I think the quote he uses is, sharing my revelations about my failures as a leader is a more powerful invitation. Self-righteousness just isn't transformative. Exactly.
Yep.
This is why I don't ascribe. We've talked about this in the past. I don't ascribe to the get on the bus is going. And it's why I use that metaphor. The bus always comes back around. That's why it's a bus stop. You can wait there. It'll come back for you. I'll always come back.
I like that. Here I was going to make a flippant remark and that's why we should have a podcast called An Imperfect Leader, because it is through revealing our experiences and where we have fallen short is what will yield even better learning and better decisions moving forward. Telling people how successful I was, like that's where you get on my case when you're like, you had a guest who just said, oh yeah, I struggled with this for a second, but then I did this and it's all good. You're like, how was that learning? That wasn't learning. This was a profound blow up that happened. And I had to do a ton of self-reflection. And truly, it wasn't until others shared how my actions impacted them that I began to shift the way I behave. Like, that is so much more compelling.
And I just feel like so human. I know you and I are probably both so heavily lean into that kind of level of reflection.
I didn't always. I think part of it was, well, first of all, experiencing that kind of like mistake certainly humanizes you and reminds you, you know what? This is not easy work. And stop thinking that you're supposed to be perfect, and stop judging people, and all of that. Stop shaming others, and all of it.
Exactly.
All of it.
Exactly.
Anyway, this was a great conversation. You and me, and the one that AJ and I had. I thought not very often do I get to talk with somebody who's got state level experience with the TEA as well as with the Texas Education Authority, or having had this experience in Kansas City as a board member. And so anyway, it was great fun, and thanks for the conversation about it.
I want to just reiterate that how fun and unique it was to hear from the board's perspective and someone who's trying to actually shift how boards work together. I kind of loved it.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. Jamie, I'll see you next week.
Yeah, see you next week.